You know, some plays are just for entertainment. Others, they really make you think. But then there are the really rare ones, the ones that literally change the law. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. John Galsworthy's 1910 play, Justice. This wasn't just a story. It was an argument so powerful it shook up the British Parliament and actually led to major prison reforms.
So right there, that's the whole play in a nutshell. It's this chilling idea that justice isn't some thoughtful human process. Nope, it's a machine. And once you push the start button, it just rolls on, completely indifferent to the people it's about to crush. And now we're going to see what happens to a young man who gets caught right in those gears.
All right, so how does this machine get that starting push? Well, it all begins with a crime, but not one born out of evil or greed. This is a crime of pure desperation. Let's meet our main character, William Falder, a young clerk whose entire life is about to get turned upside down by a single fateful choice.
So who is William Falder? He's just a 23-year-old law clerk. He's not some hardened criminal, not at all. He's in love with a woman named Ruth Honeywell. And here's the thing. Ruth is trapped. She's in a marriage with a man who's incredibly violent. After her husband tries to kill her, she comes to Falder, begging him to help her and her kids escape. And well, that pushes Falder right to the edge.
So, to get the money they need to run away together, Falder does something desperate. He forges a check from his company. It's a small change, really. He just turns £9 into £90. But that one simple alteration done in a moment of sheer panic, well, it's the act that seals his fate.
And, of course, it doesn't take long for it all to unravel. It happens fast. First, a discrepancy shows up in the company's bank balance. Then, the cashier is brought in, and he points the finger right at Falder. And when they confront Falder with the evidence, he confesses. And just like that, the machine, it starts to roll.
Okay, so now we're moving into the courtroom. And here, William Falder stops being a person with a story. He becomes the prisoner at the bar. This is where the formal, impersonal process of the law really takes over.
So the trial really boils down to two completely different stories. On one side, you've got the defense. They're pleading for mercy, arguing it was a moment of temporary insanity, that he's a patient, not a criminal. But then you have the prosecution, and they're not buying it. They paint it as just an ordinary forgery, a calculated crime committed for an immoral reason. They see him as a danger to society.
And the judge? Well, he sides with the prosecution. He puts it this way. The law is what it is, a majestic edifice. He sees the law as this grand, unshakable structure. There's no room for emotion here. And because the crime was connected to what he calls an immoral design, helping a married woman leave her husband, he feels his hands are tied. For the law, that motive doesn't earn mercy. It makes it impossible. The verdict comes in. Guilty. And the sentence? It's 3 years of penal servitude. Just like that, Falder's fate is sealed.
So the verdict's in. But this is where Galsworthy really shifts the focus of the play. See, Falder's trial might be over, but now the entire penal system is put on trial. We're about to see what this kind of punishment actually does to a human being.
Just look at this timeline. The crime was in July. The trial, October. By December, he's in solitary confinement. That's the first part of his ordeal. Total isolation. A practice that isn't really about reform, it's designed to break a person's spirit.
And Galsworthy shows us this in a really powerful way. There's this one famous scene with no dialogue at all. The stage directions just describe Falder in his cell. It says, he begins pacing the cell, moving his head like an animal pacing its cage. He's not a man anymore. He's been reduced to a cornered animal, just completely unraveling from the silence and the pressure.
And then the scene reaches its peak. Suddenly, a faint banging sound starts from another cell, and it spreads, like a contagion of desperation, from one cell to the next. And finally, Falder breaks. The stage directions say he's panting violently. He flings himself at his door and beats on it. It's this primal scream against the silence. And this is what the system calls reformation.
Okay, so fast forward 2 years. Falder is finally released. He's out on parole. But the real question is he actually free? Galsworthy's final act gives a pretty devastating answer to that, and it's a harsh verdict on the whole idea of a second chance.
Falder himself says it best. He feels like he's struggling against a thing that's all around me. He calls it a net. Every time he cuts his way out of one part, it just grows back somewhere else. And that's his life now. He's branded a criminal, and even though society might talk about forgiveness, what he actually faces is constant suspicion. He just can't escape his past.
Then, a glimmer of hope. His old law firm actually offers to take him back. They'll give him a second chance, a steady job. But there's a condition, and it's a brutal one. He has to give up Ruth, the very woman he committed the crime for in the first place. They tell him to make a clean sheet of it. So he's faced with this impossible choice, his love or his survival.
And just as he's wrestling with this decision, the net tightens. A detective shows up at the office. Turns out Falder is a convict on ticket of leave, and he failed to check in with the authorities. He's violated his parole. The machine he thought he'd escaped, it's back to claim him.
The thought of going back to that cell, back to that solitary horror, it's too much. And in that moment, Falder makes one final, desperate choice. To escape being arrested, he throws himself down a flight of stone stairs. He breaks his neck. It's the only way he can see to finally get away from the machine.
The play ends on such a heartbreaking, bitter note. Coxon, the kind, older clerk who always had a soft spot for Fowler, looks at his body and says, "No one will touch him now, never again. He's safe with gentle Jesus." And the irony is just crushing. The only way Fowler could truly be safe from the system of justice was in death.
Wow. So Fowler's story isn't just some tragedy, right? It's clearly a carefully built argument, so let's break it down. What exactly is Galsworthy trying to tell us here?
Well, first, he's saying that the law acts like an impersonal, unstoppable machine. Second, the prison system, especially with things like solitary confinement, doesn't reform people, it destroys them. It's basically torture. And then, what happens when they get out? Society offers them no real path to get back on their feet. So the biggest takeaway is this: what the law calls justice and what is actually right or moral, well, those two things are not always the same, not even close.
And here's the craziest part. This play had a massive real-world impact. It wasn't just some performance people saw and forgot about. It actually sparked a huge debate in Parliament. The Home Secretary at the time, a guy you might have heard of named Winston Churchill, he went to see the play. And he was so moved by it that he personally championed major prison reforms, including a huge reduction in the use of solitary confinement. Think about that. It's one of those incredibly rare moments where a piece of art directly changed a country's laws.
So it leaves us with this huge question, the same one the play asks. Is justice really that majestic edifice the judge talked about, this grand structure that shelters all of us? Or is it more like a cage, a machine that once it gets a hold of you, never truly lets you go? It's been over 100 years since Galsworthy wrote this, but you have to admit, that question feels just as urgent today.